Okay. This next little bit, you don't have to know. If you're one of those sorts of people, you can just turn off for about 4 minutes. This is purely motivational, right? This is, why do economists even bother, right? Why do economists focus on perfect competition, and why do we talk about other things as though they're worse? Right, so purely motivational, I'm going to introduce a new concept called consumer surplus and social surplus that you do not have to know for the exam. It's one of the failings of the book. The book doesn't really have a good logic here. It compares markets without the tools, I think, that are necessary really to talk about efficient markets, which is producing consumer surplus. So I'm very unhappy with the book in this particular part. Okay. So for those of you who can just switch off, do something else. So when I was talking about monopoly, I was talking about what was called producer surplus. Producer surplus is a bit like profit. It's really saying, let's have a look and see how much it cost for the monopolist. Here we're going to draw a supply and MC curve and assume that they're the same. Our marginal cost curve is telling you how much does it cost to produce each one of those units. In this case, we're producing QPC units. The cost of producing them is the area under the marginal cost curve. But the monopolist then turns around and sells them, or whichever the firm is producing this, for PPC. So if you think of each one of those units there between 0 and QPC, each one of them only costs the height of the marginal cost curve, but the firm turned around and sold them for the perfectly competitive price, something higher. And that difference between the two is that blue shaded area. That's what the firm gets to keep. That's what's called producer surplus, meaning how much do you get for operating in this market. It's not the same as profit, though, for complicated reasons that I don't want you guys to worry about. So let's just say that the blue shaded areas, how much does the firm gain from operating in this market and selling QPC units of goods at PPC? Right. What about buyers? What do they gain? Well, think about what that demand curve is telling you. Each point on that demand curve, the height of the demand curve, is saying there's someone out there who's willing to pay at least that much for it. Each time you think about going down the demand curve, that height of the demand curve is telling you there's somebody out there and they're willing to pay, say, $10 for this product. But they only have to pay something less, PPC. The rest of it they get to pocket. That's like me talking about coffee at CSU campus. I might be willing to pay $10 a cup because I'm really desperate for coffee early in the morning. But I only have to pay $4.50 at Cafe Mitchell. In a sense, that extra $5.50 I get to keep. That would be my consumer surplus. I was willing to pay $10 for this cup of coffee. I only have to pay $4.50, so the rest is mine. So the red area here then is the value to consumers because this market exists. If nobody could sell coffee on CSU campus, that would disappear. Poof. I don't get my cup of coffee. The thing that I valued at $10 disappears. I don't have it. There's no value to me now. So what's the value then of the market? The red area is a consumer surplus. The blue area is a producer surplus. The social surplus is actually the sum of the two. That's saying how much as a society are we better off because this market exists, right? So we're saying the social surplus of a market in operation is a whole area. It's like the whole area between the demand curve and the marginal cost curve. Think about each one of those units that's being sold between 0 and QPC. Each one of them only costs the height of the marginal cost curve to produce, but someone out there in the market is willing to pay the height of the demand curve for it. So that cup of coffee, the first cup of coffee in the morning, I was willing to pay $10 for down at Mitchell Catering. That might have cost them $2.50 to make. So that whole gap between there, that $7.50 is all social surplus. Someone out there is gaining. In this case, since it's sold for $4.50, Mitchell gains $2 and I gain $5.50. So the social surplus is simply the value that this market, because this market exists. If we didn't have coffee sold on CSU campus, that whole area would be lost. I wouldn't get my coffee. Mitchell Catering wouldn't get the profit from producing the coffee for me. So this is why economists imagine that perfectly competitive industries are producing something of value. There's a value here to the consumer and a value to the producer. Now, in economics, you might ask, okay, but why do we care about companies? Right? So Australia's got 22 million people in it. We might care about the 22 million people. So we might think that this red area is a good thing, because that's a value to somebody from, say, the coffee that they got. But what about the value to Mitchell Catering, that $2? Why do we care about firm profits? Well, the answer is that that $2 in firm profits goes back to somebody somehow. That $2 in firm profits goes back to, say, people through dividends, anyone who's an owner of shares. That $2 in firm profits might go back to CSU. In a sense, it then funds other services being provided by CSU. It might help pay for the library. So we have a social value. This blue producer surplus counts as much as the red producer, the blue producer surplus counts just like the red consumer surplus does, because eventually all that money heads back to someone in Australia. So it's producing something